you very much. Mr. Mahoney, you may have to sit back a little bit so that I can see Mr.
Yes, Senator.
Given our
yes.
geography here at this point. In the Senate, there are moments of considerable bipartisanship. One area of bipartisanship has been the Oceans Caucus that exists in the Senate. It members, I think, more than a third of the membership of the Senate, and it's fairly evenly balanced between the two parties. Senator Murkowski of Alaska and I founded it some time ago, and its work has produced 4 treaties and 2 pieces of significant legislation, all passed through the Senate by unanimous consent. One of those pieces, the most recent one, comes much thanks to Senator Sullivan of Alaska, and that is the Senate's first legislation on marine plastic debris in the oceans. And one of the recommendations in that legislation is that the trade representative pay more attention to this issue. And one of the reasons that we hand it to the trade representative to pay attention to this issue is a study, which I'll provide you a copy of after the hearing, that shows that the vast majority of the marine debris and waste that ends up in the ocean comes into the ocean as a result of a failure of upland waste management. And a very few countries are primarily responsible for that upland stream of plastic debris that ends up in the oceans. You will not be surprised that China is the leading offender, followed by Indonesia, Philippines, Vietnam, Sri Lanka, and Thailand. Those all being Pacific and Indian Ocean countries, the obvious geographic result for us is that while we do beach cleanups in Rhode Island with trash bags to pick up the plastic waste, in Alaska, they have to do those beach cleanups with dumpsters and front-end loaders and barges. And in some cases, there is tons of plastic waste per mile of coastline. This is an issue that has some real significance. We're headed for a crossover point in about 2050, if nothing changes, where the mass of marine plastic waste in the oceans will be greater than the mass of living fish in the oceans. I don't think that's the place where we want to be. It'll be very hard to explain to our grandchildren why we did nothing on that. We also face the hazard of what this plastic does when it breaks down into smaller and smaller physical pieces and then enters the food chain, very often at the very lowest levels of the food chain, and then climbs back up through the different trophic levels, and suddenly we humans are eating things that, unprecedented in the history of the planet, now have all of this plastic baked into their diets, and we don't know what that means. So those are 2 important issues. I have a general concern that environmental issues get very short shrift in trade negotiations and even shorter shrift in trade enforcement. This seems like an area where we could have a very significant bipartisan win, and because the issue is negligent upland waste management, and because America has very good waste management companies, it would seem to me that this could be actually a trade win for us if we could get China, Indonesia, Philippines, Vietnam, Sri Lanka, Thailand, and some of these other countries to accept as part of their trade responsibilities with us that they will clean up their act in upland waste management. Give me some reassurance that this is an issue that each of you would be willing to consider in trade negotiations, given its clear bipartisan support here in the Senate and given its potential impact in the future.
Well, Senator, I certainly I certainly look forward to working with you and other of your colleagues who are interested in this issue. In general, I think that I'm glad you mentioned bipartisanship and trade policy. I think that that's really important. And I am really excited about finding any areas, including potentially this one,
This was
where there
so
is
bipartisan and
right.
actually passed by unanimous consent.
Wonderful.
You don't get much more bipartisan than that.
Absolutely.
So sorry to interrupt.
No, just to emphasize, I think that these areas where we have bipartisan consensus are something that I'm particularly excited about moving forward on. And this issue, I look forward to having a follow-up conversation with you, hopefully.
Shay?
Well, thank you, Mr. Senator. I'm very privileged to answer your first question on the Senate Finance Committee. But
Make it a good one.
well, I'll try. Thank you for educating me about the issue. I mean, I've read news reports about this place in the Pacific where this huge, enormous
Pacific gyres.
Yeah, exactly. So I appreciate the education. I know at the WTO, one of the things I expect to work on would be illegal fishing subsidies, subsidies for harmful fishing. That's something that the WTO intends to take up. They kind of passed the last ministerial, but over the next 2 years, they hope to have an agreement on harmful subsidies that promote illegal and overfishing.
I appreciate that. And the four treaties and that first bipartisan unanimous consent piece of legislation were all related to illegal pirate fishing. And specifically, the legislation was the Port States Measures Agreement, which you'll also have the opportunity to enforce. So I hope that you can take the signal from the bipartisanship of this and from its environmental and trade significance that here's an area that, although new to trade negotiations, because nobody's bothered to deal with it before, is important and is something that you'd have the backing of the Senate as you pursued it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator.